We like to tell ourselves that we live in some civilized age where reason and rational thought reign supreme due to the fact that we've polished up the barbarity that still drives most of humanity. We've put a veneer on human nature at its base through technology, titles, and what are considered norms of society. We play pretend that in our modern era, everything can be worked out with one another when in disputes, if we just have enough patience, empathy, and eagerness to compromise when possible with each other. You know, have the understanding to see from one another's point of view and have humility to give up some things. With anticipation, the other side will reciprocate in good faith in order for all parties to be content and move forward. And if it were true that we do indeed live in some civilized age where the reasonable and rational ran the world, or even populated it with a majority, the act of compromising might sound like a good thing. It might sound like the most logical thing in disputes to work towards. Alas, it is not true, and we do not live in that age. And as the barbarity of man rises up to the surface again past the veneer of order we have deluded ourselves into believing was in control, the cost of compromise must be considered in the reality of our world. Our world, especially as of late, is becoming more and more obvious to most certainly not be under the management of angels. From sea to shining sea, and even further than that, the light of the sun is burning down upon the corruption that has been ever so deeply rooted just beneath in all our systems. Seems to me the theme of the year, historical note, the year of this scribbleless 2024, is in monsters of society, and politics, entertainment, high society, low society, and every demographic in between are being brought forth to the light of day, along with all those who assisted them through action or apathy. Good Sir Cat Williams kicked us all off to a right good start by setting the example of how indeed a civilized society ought to respond to unrighteous indignity. Unrighteous indignity that in some way or another has affected each and every one of us. We, with eyes to see, have to know that the recent coming forth, revealing an apocalypse of prominent people, institutions, celebrity, and nations that are hardwired into our daily lives to be the vilest den of vipers, and thus the current state of affairs in the entire world. Why? Compromise. Compromises. Little bitty compromises here and there along the way with this unrighteous indignity that has been growing amongst humanity as if it were also humanity. The slow, steady trickle of allowance via compromise with those who we, through our naivety, assume are reasonable and rational over the course of history has gotten us to the shambles of the laughing stock of what we call society. The emperor has no clothes, and now everybody most certainly knows. The drywall is rotting from the wood, and the wood is nearly consumed by termites. You know it, I know it, we all know it. Due to the failure of good people not digging their heels in on doing that which is right, no matter the odds and no matter the stakes. Surprise, you live in a world of human child sex trafficking. Isn't that horrifying? Isn't that terrifying? Doesn't it make you infuriated enough to do something about the fact that you live in that world? And if it does, because it should, then you have to see that that's possible because good people do nothing, or worse, they compromise to act on what is right when the opportunity to do so presents itself to them. As it is said in the scriptures, you lack the courage of your conviction, sir. And now here we are, Armageddon, individually, nationally, globally, and even further than that. All our tiny personal and not so tiny and impersonal worlds are falling apart. Somewhere along the line, if you trace it back far enough in our collective story in your own personal life, I would guarantee where all the trouble started was when there was a compromise with this unrighteous indignity that visits us all. This force that resists us all and others and institutions through threat, duress, coercion, manipulation, and all sorts of other malevolent methods of subjugating others, oftentimes the innocent. Remember that bully in middle school that got off on traumatizing his or her peers? Did you ever see a scenario where the best or most likely outcome of the bully dynamic is where they both come to a compromise? Of course not. That isn't how the dynamic works, now is it? No. The dynamic of bullied goes a few different ways, so hear me out. In one scenario, the bully accomplishes its goal and traumatizes the bullied into fear, faint, and fawn. In the event the bullied allows this scenario to continue unrectified, it is most likely the bullying will continue ad nauseum. This will, of course, cause detrimental adverse consequences for the bullied for life, and even further than that. It will also embolden the bully that this sort of behavior is how one gets what they want in life, and the bully will only grow bigger and more ruthless in its methods over time. As you can see, this is not an ideal scenario. Nevertheless, it occurs far too often. So let's take a look at another scenario. This time, the bully begins its bullshit with the bullied, and an outside messiah figure do-gooder comes along and happens to see the nonsense transpiring. With swiftness, the do-gooder intervenes and puts the bullied in its place with equal or greater force and physicality or willingness for lethality, which is to say, oh yes, the do-gooder will take it there. Normally, in this scenario, the bully will skitter away, perhaps with a protest or two, but in any event, the bully-bully dynamic was somewhat averted. And sure, this is probably a better scenario because the bullied didn't get walloped yet again in this instance, but this wouldn't have the most optimal of outcomes now, would it? The bullied would probably develop some complexes about self-worth, having not taken the opportunity to stand up for himself or herself, and more likely than not, more opportunities for the bully to come around and collect its pound of flesh while the outside messiah figure do-gooder is nowhere to be seen is probable. Like, it's gonna happen. Then where is the bullied? Right back to square one, but probably worse than that. Therefore, in the face of unrighteous indignity, when taking the form of a bully and a bully-bully dynamic, the best possible scenario would go something like this. The bully begins their bullshit with the would-be bullied. The would-be bullied recognizes this unrighteous indignity before them for what it is, comprehends that compromise with the bully is not an option, quickly evaluates that in the event the bully-bully dynamic plays out to altercation, it is likely the would-be bullied will most certainly be injured somewhat in the scuffle. The would-be bully accepts this likelihood, then proceeds to grab that motherfucker by the throat and squeeze until it crunches, or die trying. Yeah, it could get a bit messy, but let's face it, in this hypothetical and metaphorical scenario, it's probably the best course of action with the best results afterwards for everyone. The would-be bully breaks the dynamic, or at the very least greatly reduces the dynamic from the impact that it has further down the road, and has a sense of pride and confidence in himself or herself in having defended themselves, emboldening them to continue doing this sort of thing in the future. And the bully learns a valuable lesson. Not everyone is simply going to put up with their bullshit without a resistance that can only come from a place of no compromise. There is always a cost to compromise. And in a civilized world ran by angels and free from the unrighteous indignity that pervades us all daily, perhaps the cost wouldn't be so bad. And sure, in many instances or disputes with truly rational and reasonable people, compromise can occur. However, compromise in the company of violators, deceivers, and opportunists devoid of empathy for their fellow man comes with a cost quite often that can never be paid off. Pray to God a generation visits this earth once again that will dig their heels in on what is right, let the chips fall where they may, and refuse to compromise with unrighteous indignity wheresoever it may rear its ugly heads. As never before in human history, a nebulously authored quote will define our generations that have gotten us to the state of affairs we are in. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. Zen in the Car, for the spiritually minded liberty activist on the go. Liketh, shareth, subscribeth. It's what the cool kids do.